Okay, what I'm planning to do is to introduce each panel member and then ask them to speak, if I may ask, very, very briefly about their interest in this area. So I'll start on my very far right, spatially, if not politically, with Piers Wilkinson, who is the Disabled Students Officer at the NUS. Piers?
Yeah, sure. My interest in being on this panel in particular is that I have both personal and professional experience on hate crime and abuse, to sort of talk about tuition fees to a certain extent. As a result of the hate crime that was perpetuated on myself, I've got a debt around about £150,000, ever so slightly. One of those ones that financial and the way in which we silo incidences has an inherent issue when we talk about wider society debt and the ongoing issues of the way in which we talk about abuse and harassment. And it's difficult to not talk about hate and harassment and crime without talking about it's inherently political. Just yesterday, I was at the round table for Disabled Student Experiences, the commission, and it was even brought up by the chair that again and again and again, the disabled students there were talking about how it was the inherent biases within the student cohort and the staff that was causing the perpetual hate and harassment that they were experiencing as disabled people. And it's the same with my colleagues in the Liberation team, the Women's Officer and the Black Students Officer are finding the exact same, that it's inherent political biases and myths and perpetuation of myths in media that comes onto campus. So we can't silo any discussion about campus without knowing where this is coming from. And because we've got to be quite brief, as it were, and want to get on to questions, I just want to say that reliance on criminal case numbers in my situation and in many others, reliance of going through a formal process before you get support is inherently wrong. It is a way for student reporting to be difficult, particularly for disabled students to access stuff, physical access. But generally, as an attitudinal mental health, we talked about mental health and people don't want to come forward. When you're putting in a requirement for a criminal case, we know there's issues within the criminal prosecution system. There's an inherent issue there. And touching on slightly on sexual violence is the use of universities focusing on reputational damage and getting students that have been victims and are survivors to sign non-disclosure agreements, regardless of the outcome of their complaints. And that is also inherently political. So when we have these conversations, generally, that in my experience, both professionally and personally, to fix this, we've got to look at the politics that cause why we have such an issue on campus.
Thanks very much, Piers. Thank you. And then I'll hand over to Professor Osama Khan, who's going to tell us about your sort of input in this area.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne, for promoting the Equality Act 2010. The first thing I would say that as a settled British person, I was born in Bangladesh and grew up in Bangladesh, but now I'm settled here. One of the things that I'm really proud about is the Equality Act 2010. So I'm a teacher. I believe in educating people and having conversation and removing misunderstanding and misconception of different diversity. But then I'm also British, Bangladeshi, and Muslim. So I just want to share 4 quick stories very, very quickly. When I first came to this country, I came here to study at Cambridge. With a lot of identity crisis, I cling on to Islamic Society, and I vividly remember as a vice president of the society to organize an event where one of the scholars, couldn't quite remember his name, put down a female student from Cambridge who was advocating the rights of the LGBTQ, and at that time I felt really good about that. Subsequently, I joined University of Surrey, where I first met a very close friend, a Greek friend. According to his idea, he's a professor now at the University of Bath, he thought all Muslims are really backdated medieval individuals, have nothing to contribute to the world, until we became best friends, and we are still best friends, and we think very highly of each other. The third story that I want to just quickly share, I believe in a multi-faith chaplaincy. And through that chaplaincy work, in every university I worked, I always volunteered to be a Muslim chaplain. And I come to know wholly about what Christianity, Judaism, and any other faith and they stand for. And last but not least, during my probationary time, or in America, what we call tenureship at the University of Surrey, I went to a lot of pressure to balance between teaching and my scholarship and research work. And as a Bangladeshi Muslim, I didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't know how to help myself, but I clearly knew that I'm going through some phase of mental health situation, and I accessed the counseling service, and I realized that how important for university sector to educate the diverse community to understand what it means. So based on those 4 stories, there is a lot of work I've done, which I'm not going to say, but you can ask me questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Osama. Roisin Wood from Kick It Out couldn't be here today, so we're unveiling a new signing in the spirit of the football analogy. Martha Jeffcott, who's from Empowered Campus, where she's an activist who trains in anti-misogyny, hate crime and violence against women.
I'm great. I'm so pleased to be the new signing for the day. Thank you so much for having me. I said I was a star attraction earlier, which I'm definitely going to go with from now on. So my name is Martha Jeffcott, and I'm here as the co-founder of Empowered Campus. Empowered Campus really has come out of a place with a deep, deep passion for higher education. University completely changed my life, and I think all of us in this room today are here because we really continue to have that passion. And university is a transformative space for students, the people that they become and the people that they want to be in society. In terms of sexual violence, I think that we need to take this passion and apply some real, detailed, on-the-ground, resourceful tips and guidance and resources for universities. I've worked on structural change, whether that be misogyny, hate crime in Nottingham and training Nottinghamshire police officers in that field, and I've also worked in institutional change, so multiple universities redoing their entire work for sexual violence survivors and survivors of harassment. And what I've seen throughout all of that work is incredible bravery from survivors coming forward to talk about the most tragic experiences of their life, having faith in institutions when they come forward to having those conversations, having faith in the staff that they know and those touch points that they have, and the incredible bravery that that process takes. And also some amazing goodwill and some amazing institutional leaders who navigate this system with survivors. Unfortunately, it is a navigation, and it's not something that we see today as a well-oiled machine. It's not something that survivors find easy. It's not something that the staff that are supporting them find easy, and I think that's on an institutional level as well as a national picture. So where does Empowered Campus fit in all this? We pull together academics, lawyers, student survivors, alumni, ex-students, supportive staff like local rape crisis centres, and we pull together that insight to offer a gold standard package for sexual assault and sexual harassment survivors, both in terms of prevention and assault. We come into universities and we do an audit. We look at what is currently happening well, what is currently happening not so well, and we develop and deliver a really bespoke service for these universities to build on what they've already done and also amplify what needs to be done. So this can look like a range of different things. We do everything from policy, training, both for students, that can look like bystander training, for staff it can look like trauma-informed training. We policy, training, pathways, and we also do enhanced outreach. So we look at where students are already disclosing and make sure that we're amplifying that and getting more disclosures in and making sure that they're cared for post-disclosure. For the last 6 years, I've really wished that there was a service out there that we could go to as universities looking to offer gold standard care and get everything we need for this, everything we need for students and staff to have the best possible experience after such a horrific event. And finally, Empowered Campus offer that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martha. Right, so we want to get as many questions in as possible. So just a couple of very quick points. Please do say who you are, where you're from, etc. And please do make it a question rather than a comment, or if it is a comment, with a question at the end of it very quickly. And I will try and channel the questions as effectively as possible. So there's one over there.
Is that working? Yes. I'm Aileen, I'm a Dean for Students at a healthcare university. And I'd really like to ask something that I find personally really, really challenging, which is the expectation if there's been a serious sexual assault, but if a student doesn't want to go to the police, but the university should sort of fill the gap, because my experience has been that we really aren't very good at it. We're not, we're quite small. We don't have the skills. I'm just worried that we do it wrong, and we could. I guess I'm just concerned that by raising that expectation, we're creating a not such. And I know there are lots of problems with the criminal justice system, but I'm just worried that we're trying to do it, badly, and we're not really qualified.
Okay.
Interesting views on what we should do.
Piers, that sort of picked up a little bit what you were saying, which is, expecting people to go to the criminal justice system first doesn't necessarily help the person because it's not an easy experience. Do you have any thoughts about how universities might strike that balance between not replicating a criminal justice system but supporting people?
I think, firstly, give yourself more credit than you've given yourself. The issue with the criminal justice system is that they don't understand student life and student experience, or, to a certain extent, how liberation status can impact on your personal experience, particularly when it comes to sexual violence. And it's understanding that whilst your services aren't bespoke or directed at that, you will do more at connecting with that student and talking with that student than sort of asking them to go to the police or the way in which they'll do that. Because more often than not, we found within NUS that if you're worried about being able to support them, they will therefore not receive any resolution. The women's officer at NUS, my colleague, and myself both believe that it's about getting resolution and support for the person that has experienced this over punishment, over all the other aspects of a sexual violence or any sort of abuse case. Because it's about maintaining that person's continued plan and support within your institution and making sure that they have the support network there, whether it's helping them through mental health, whether it's reaching out to partner organisations that deal with the specifics of that instance, whether it was, in my case, it was a disability-related hate crime. In many others, it's sexual violence, are having cross links. So I think it's balancing the fact that without any support or worrying about your support is that they will therefore have nothing at all because they won't potentially. Yeah.
Dream of not supporting someone. It's more what you're saying about, the victim wants. I suppose I've got an extra level of complexity that I've got students who are going out to be doctors, for example. What do I do if I know that if I believe someone's committed a serious offence, but we don't have the ability and I think they should be going to the police, and we can't investigate forensically. All of the things that the criminal justice system is set up for. Obviously, we support victims, or alleged victims, but it just feels that we're trying to fill a gap.
I think that is such a complex question, a really, really important question, that we're not going to be able to answer that unless we spend the rest of the time just answering that one question. I mean, I think there is a lot of work to be done across the sector in finding the balance that you're talking about. We're on we've started a journey through the UUK guidance that came out, and people are having to adapt to their thinking, but ultimately really important, and I'm sorry we're not going to be able to sort of answer that right now. But
I'm Dave Corcoran. I'm from the University of Chichester, saying hi to us. I think we met some time ago and were doing bits. My question, I do think there's third-party reporting that can link in with the last question as well, and with professional status and a safeguarding role, there are ways through there. My question was specifically, and it might be for you, Anne, it was the area where we would need to report through something. So effectively, there might be an investigation. Take an example from my own university. A senior lecturer who's being reported, it's all gone through now. That member of staff has been dismissed. There was sexual involvement with a student outside of the university, but where that person was in a position of power. It went through a whole police investigation, and because what happened was behind closed doors, there was evidence that something happened. Both had admitted to that, but it was outside of the university, but under the auspices of working with that student. Therefore, went through an investigation with the university, and that person was dismissed. My difficulty is that very often the police will ask, and this links back to you, Piers, the police will ask us not to continue our investigation while a criminal investigation is going on. And therefore you get a pause, and you're trying to support the student party, or if it's both student parties, that's fine. But when it can't go beyond the criminal investigation, the university, it's still incumbent on the university to follow through. But that is still a difficult area for us. We're just getting used to it. And I just wonder if there's some good practice out there that might be referenced either by yourself and or other colleagues in the room. Thanks.
You're at really one of the cutting edge areas of the law right now. It's a big issue, to be sure. You have legal obligation yourself as an institution under the Equality Act. You have to make sure you take appropriate acts. And if there's a criminal act, then that has to supersede that, of course. But usually what we find with the police, that they try to get their stuff done pretty rapidly. But something has to get done. We're finding universities offer just to put protections around the student, you know, things like that. You put her or him on paid leave, the professor get them out, get the student in school, get them with therapy, and tell them you'll come back to it as soon as you can once the criminal aspect has been sorted.
I'll just shout this out. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. It's simply that if you can't get a result through the criminal justice system, but you still know professionally what has happened is wrong, I think we have to do something. But there is that member of staff could have put back a case against us.
Yes.
I think, even though we felt it was the right thing to do.
That's always been what's held people hostage. It's the bad actors threaten all the time they're going to bring a suit. And what we find now, we say bring it on. Because unless you publish the names of people and you actually, you know, go public and bring court cases, it doesn't stop. I mean, as Piers is talking about the private lives, the people are so important. My interest, of course, are the people, but I'm trying to stop a widespread infrastructure problem. How do we do that? And we know that you have to pursue grievances, you have to publicize the people who have done these things, and you can't be frightened of being claimed against. You know.
That does, of course, mean you've got to make sure that all your processes are robust and sound. And I think that's sometimes also the problem, that people are very anxious about implementing these processes. And so when there is some pushback, everybody feels on the back foot and therefore more inclined to say, okay, well, we won't deal with this. We'll find some other way round it. So I think it's a combination of having the kind of desire to say we are going to end this, but also the processes that support people to make robust decisions, which are challenging. So, any other questions?
I wonder if we can, because I think the last two questions are probably the same, or part of the same issue that we're actually all struggling with, which is about jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So my institution, my name is John, I'm from the University of Birmingham. We talk a lot at the moment, and this is not about the jurisdiction of support, as the previous question said. That you know, we're not arguing about the jurisdiction of support. It's about jurisdiction for investigations and action. And much like the previous question, I am aware of other universities in our region who are looking at hiring private investigation firms, and bringing in people to do investigations for them, because the university doesn't feel that they can do it for themselves and do it well. But one of the other jurisdiction questions, this is my question, is where does the university's jurisdiction end? So we're quite clear in our policies and regulations that our jurisdiction exists on campus. If a student is assaulted on campus by another student, police investigation or no, we will investigate and take action in those circumstances. If a student assaults another student off campus, is that within our jurisdiction? Because there you have got the police in play, you have got all the issues around investigations and evidence that we just can't do because we're not the police. But do we still have a responsibility to investigate actions that happen outside of our control, outside of our premises? Is that still within our jurisdiction?
I think that's a great question, and I suspect it's one where the panel wouldn't necessarily agree on the answer to that, actually. No, I am absolutely willing to tell you what I think about that. I mean, I'm trying not to dominate the conversation because I'm only meant to be chairing the panel, but I'm very happy to tell you what I think, which is that ultimately students are they are students, and anything that's in the context of them being students with you is potentially in scope. But they're also private individuals. So in the middle of their summer holidays, if they go off and do something as friends and something happens, I'm really very much questioning whether you should have jurisdiction over that. Because if we're not careful, we start seeing our students as our quasi-employees. They're always on duty, and they're not. You know, ultimately, they may do things that are wrong in their private lives. I think they've got to be very careful there. But I do know that will not be the universal view of this panel.
But you've drawn the law and where it is. The line that she's just drawn is where it happens. If they're together doing university business, the university is liable. Doesn't matter if it's off campus at some pub. Doesn't matter. At a conference, you're liable. But if it's holidays, you know,
or private, private, just social interactions that are not linked to being, that they're friends. They've developed a friendship outside it or a social relationship outside it. So I think that is the line. And I think if we don't respect that line, then all sorts of other things start to flow, where you've got people who are expressing perhaps political views that some people don't like, and then they start to say, you need to take action against this student because they've expressed their support for this party and I don't like that. We've really got to be a little bit careful about that line. But there's an awful lot we could do on campus. Can I just say one last point before I hand back to questions? I think we all default to the hard part of this discussion, which is the punishment of miscreants who have done things wrong. But there's actually a lot of work that could be done to help prevent these things arising. That won't prevent everything, because there are bad actors, as Anne said, who will misbehave nonetheless. But there's a lot of stuff we could be doing to try to make it absolutely clear what our expectations of behaviour are, such that when things start to go wrong, you can intervene much more quickly. I mean, some of the times the issues is students, obviously not with things which are serious sexual assault, but there are other behaviour where students will say, well, I didn't realise that was actually a problem. Why can't I do that? So I think it would be interesting to get any questions which are perhaps thinking a little bit more about what can we do proactively, preventatively, in an education context to try and stop these very, very bad cases happening.
I just want to add one sentence onto that. Equality Act has the word anticipatory in it. So it very much is like, a lot of people focus so much on punishment and the investigative, where's the legal line? We see it very much within disabled student experiences because of the word reasonable adjustment. I'm sure every institution in the room has loved that phrase. But when it comes down to, it's more about prevention. We've seen pushback across the spectrum as NUS with consent workshops, and yet we know the issue is people's understanding of where the line is. And I think if universities take a preventative, and institutions in general, a preventative approach, you don't have to worry too much about where the hard investigative line is if you've prevented it in the first place.
I mirror that point, and I also think it's, we can talk about prevention and we can talk about these hardline cases, but only 2% of students who are assaulted are both come forward to report that assault and then are happy with the process. So we're in a situation now where we're asking more and more people to come forward and tell us about potentially the worst thing that's ever happened in their life, and then the support isn't there. So it's not necessarily just prevention, it's not necessarily just talking about these hard line, where did the line stand for universities in terms of the legal work, it's how do we best support survivors when they come forward, how do we engage more survivors to come forward. We know sexual violence is a massive problem in our society, that's compounded at universities, it's compounded when people are away from their support networks, they're in unusual cities. So I think that needs to be a real big part of the conversation that's brought forward today, and I'd welcome any questions on that.
And that's, Summer, I just want to bring you in here because some of what you were talking about at the beginning, about your experiences, was really about that, wasn't it? Because events that were quite difficult and harassing to you came from that place where people didn't know how to ask the questions or behave.
Absolutely. I think it's quite interesting, which I've observed throughout my career in higher education, and I'm observing right now, that we are dealing with this issue from a deficit model. I know that the process, the crime, those things are important, and having a support system where perpetrators can be dealt with appropriately and the victims can be supported, but we are missing out. So thank you very much, Smita, to bring out the idea of education. We are a university sector. We are in business of education. So we have to ensure that's the best way to address all these issues. So just to give you a quick example, recently I left Solent University, and literally about 6 months ago there was a case where a Muslim student and a Christian student in their hall of residence started to have debate on their faith. They started to have really quite strong debate and strong views about each other, to a level that people started to kind of do things with their food. So, for example, a slice of ham will be left on the Muslim student's food, or the Muslim student would do something similar sort by defacing the crucifixion or something like that to the Christian student, and that came out to my attention. Now, there is one way to deal with it. Discipline both of them, write them a warning letter or something like that, but we chose not to do that. We offered them that they both must have a conversation with the Christian and the Muslim faith advisor in the same room and learn how to deal with differences of opinion. We didn't punish them. We put them in a room. I was the Muslim advisor and the Christian chaplain was there as well. It was offered through the student services, and we had a conversation how to deal with the differences of opinion respectfully with each other. I think that is much more impactful as an education process, rather than constantly thinking about how to punish them. Because I know that when there is sexual violence, of course we need to think about it, but there are more ways to deal with it. And I think we need to think of universities as education provider and transformation of life through education. So let's start to think in those ways. Why curriculum doesn't have Equality Act embedded into it, no matter what you're studying? Why we don't have cultural intelligence as a compulsory element of education, no matter what's your discipline. Those are the things we need to fix, and then we can move forward with some of these very tricky issues.
Thank you. Sure, we've got more questions.
I want to respond to the questions. My name is Baroness Newlove. I was the Victims Commissioner for England and Wales for 7 years and stood down this May. And listening to, I'm also Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Bolton now. I'm really interested in all the support mechanism for victims of crime. And we are talking about policies, we're talking about education. We have got to go from an early age of understanding what consensual sex is about, because lots of them are very vulnerable, lots of girls and boys. This is not gender specific. And so the work I've done over the years is actually understanding what you are delivering, because if you've not been down that route, one small word would put them off. We've got lots to do with the police, but I, as a Pro-Vice Chancellor, want to work with all the universities to ensure we put a policy in place, but we also have trainers on the facilities that can nurture and help them. And the most important thing is, if they have been raped, we need to get them to a SARC centre, a sexual abuse centre, so they can have the medical they need. Then they make a decision whether they want to go to the police. And it's very frightening, because there is freezers full of DNA, and a lot of these are from education facilities or from employment, because A, they want to pass the degree, and B, they need to work to financially have a healthy life. So we need to close that gap. So I'm quite happy to work with anybody to do a proactive piece of work. But all about education is a good thing, but we need to do it from early, not for the university to pick up this. We've got many cultural forced marriages and everything else I'm working with. But the whole point is, there's a human being here, and we need to provide that support at their pace and their understanding, because otherwise they will be put off by everybody and will not get that solace, that justice, and have a healthier lifestyle. So please, anybody's interested, please come along and speak to me, because it's more important that we do this together. But education starts very early, and that's what we must do right across the board.
Thank you.
Can I just, sorry, before we carry on, can I just make a comment on that point? I really value that insight, because I think universities have been pushed into a space where they continually look at this as a university-only investigation process, and what we actually need to start thinking is survivors own their experience. Survivors make the choices about where they want to go, who they want to tell, what investigation process they want it to happen, whether internal or with the criminal justice system. And I think instead of looking at what hard lines do we take, and I mirror your thoughts on that, it's more that we're a part of a community, and one person in the community has harmed another. And it's mitigating those, that backdrop of that and working together on that. So I really welcome that, thank you.
Hello everyone, Shakespeare Martineau, Head of Student Experience at Rose Bruford College. As always, I really love coming to these conferences and hearing such important topics, but I think there's a great opportunity, a big opportunity that's missed when we're talking about further education students and small and specialist students and the responsibility, accountability regarding, you know, we had that conversation about how far does it go for a student when they're with their friends. When there's delivery of FE, HE provision in FE courses and they go home after 5 o'clock and something happens at 6:30 at the bus stop while they do it, whose responsibility is it? When we are sending our students on Erasmus programs to countries that might not have such advanced laws and stuff, whose responsibility is it? So for me, I think that there almost needs to be, and my question is it possible to have agile processes and procedures where it's not one size fits all? Because my concern is a student going to a country that isn't as progressive as us, that women aren't respected and valued and stuff like that, and something happens, does there have to be a death or something really bad to happen before our institutions stand up and take some sort of responsibility? And I think that could be done within the procurement processes of when you are having these partnerships, working with these organisations, being innovative by being bold and saying, actually, if you don't have these frameworks in place, if you don't have these policies in place, then I don't want to work with you, no matter how much money it's going to bring into our institution. So is that possible? Is there possible to have agile processes and procedures that could be used in these type of circumstances? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I mean, I've got a view on that, Anne. Do you want to? I mean, I'm assuming the two lawyers are going to take this one, but very happy to hear from anyone.
Well,
I think, once again, our students are learners and they're learning, and anything that stops them from learning becomes our responsibility. So I think we should really stop talking about jurisdiction, responsibility, because I have seen many times we shut door on students who are absolutely vulnerable because something catastrophic happened in their life, because it happened in a bus stand or it happened in another country. So we quickly wash our hand. That is absolutely the wrong approach. They are learners, and anything that happens in their life that stops them from learning, then it is our responsibility to support them. Not to perhaps go to the lawsuit and help them, perhaps on those grounds the lawyers can help, but in terms of supporting them so that they get on with their learning and achieve what they came here to achieve, absolutely our responsibility.
Can I just answer? I'm actually going to do my own profession down here, because I think one of the problems for all institutions is the fear of legal liability, and it stops people doing things that they want to do because they think, well, if I do this, am I somehow assuming responsibility legally? My insurers won't like it, my lawyers will tell me not to do it, those sorts of things. And that is, I'm afraid to say, often at the heart of these jurisdictional debates, because everyone's worried that you're setting precedents. If we could genuinely shift the conversation away from how much you're going to get sued for if you get this wrong, to what can you as an institution reasonably offer to do in the circumstances, then you get the agility, because you will adapt depending on the circumstances of the case. But we're not operating in that environment, and I'm afraid far too much anxiety stems from the fact that if you do try and take action where you shouldn't have done, or you take action and you get it wrong, you will be sued for that, and then everyone's paralysed and does nothing at all about decision making, which I think is I don't know what Anne feels about that, but I always look at it and think it's a shame the law had to get involved here, because I think you'd have probably done a better job without us in some ways.
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
One thing that I want to sort of say, everyone's focusing on hard line, where do we use our authority? And I think it's really important to note that we help disabled students in universities with DSA applications, because universities don't have authority on writing them, but we help people apply for those areas that it's grey on jurisdiction. And I think that's imperative, is the number one thing needs to be, what does that student need? And the jurisdictional boundaries of, can I help this student because they happen to be in this country, or it was in a pub that we don't control? Like, how does that student need support?
Yeah.
Do they need, if you don't have authority or you don't have investigative authority, ask them, how can we help you? If it's just they want support with counselling, do they get fast-tracked to the mental health services? Do they get fast-tracked support in writing an email to ask support from third parties? It's very important that it comes on a case-to-case basis on how to support them, not where that line is. Because you may actually be more key in helping them get the essential services they need from the third parties, from the Crown Prosecution Service. Because when I was had my left arm paralysed as a wheelchair user, I needed support in talking to the police and knowing how to interact with them, because I was more afraid of the police to a certain extent than the original assault. It was when a support worker in my university sat down with me and went, do you want me to write? I mean, I was just like, yeah, my left arm is paralysed, I can't write. So they helped me fill in the paperwork. And it was more important that than I couldn't care less that the guy got prosecuted. It was more that when I went to a specific member of staff and they didn't have a clue, it was a lecturer, didn't have a clue. They don't have clues on where the line is. They don't have clues on where the jurisdictional boundaries are. And they don't really know how to deal with those sorts of things. But they just asked me, what do I need? So I told them and they went away and they did it. And I think that's the approach that we need. When a student is in crisis in another country, what do they need? Do they want support in that country at tackling that institution? If they don't have the support structures in place to deal with it in that institution, ask them, do you need to fly out? Do we need to fly someone out there just to talk to them in person? And I think that should be the way in which we approach it, is on a student-to-student basis, regardless of where it happens. If my mental health goes to crap whilst I'm outside a university, my university still helps me, in theory. And I think that is, if my tyre explodes, which has happened quite a lot because they're pneumatic, my lecturers adjust to support me. It happened outside a university, but they adjust to support me. And we need it exactly the same in this. We focus so much on punishment and jurisdiction, but it is, how do we support the student? Because that student will drop out if they don't get the support.
Yeah.
And it's the ongoing nature of the amount of work they have to do to access support that is the issue.
May I add on that, just coming back to bring themes together on the rape and sexual harassment issues. And I'm talking about male rape and female rape, it's just not to women. One of the things we're finding, we have people come to us, there's this view that the student should decide. Our experience of that, perhaps a few years older, is that the students don't know what they want at the time. They're unguided. And what universities do typically is to say, well, look, we'll get you a good therapist. There's an informal complaint system. There's a formal complaint system. We can bring the police in. They edge towards, let's just get this sorted out internally. And what happens so often, and most often than not, is that years go by, period of time goes by, the person who did the informal care, thinking she or he had bought into that's what they wanted, grows up and says, oh, wait a minute, that's not at all what I want. And I find as a lawyer, I'm going after universities now that didn't say, you need to get a rape kit done. There's some basic care things that I don't think we can leave it to a student to say, well, no, I've been messed with, I hate myself. No, you have to go to the hospital. You have to have a rape kit done. It's got to be labeled. And then if in 5 years you want to do something, you've got the rape kit. But I think we have to really make some decisions with respect. It can't be just, Martha, well, what do you want? People don't know what they want. And I hope that the people in this room can come together with good guidance for people when terrible things happen, which nobody wishes for anybody. When terrible things happen to good people, what do? You need to guide them. There have to be good guidance procedures. And likewise for the bad actors, they need to know that there's going to be consequences too. Mm-hmm.
No, I absolutely mirror that point, and I think it's, I mirror your point on it's the university role to facilitate those informed choices, and I also think that students need to be aware of those choices before the event. So, on induction, making sure that everybody knows who to call, what office to go to, should they need to disclose, should they need support, in order to make those informed choices that the university should navigate them through. I also mirror that point because I think that survivors can get real decision fatigue. They're being asked to make decisions. And I think that's where a caring, trusted relationship with one person at the university becomes essential. That they have someone that they can call, that they can talk to. This person treats them as priority above all other work, and they can navigate that system for them and help them with those informed choices. Yeah.
One more question I think we've got time for. So.
Hi, I'm Josh Callender from University of Bath. We've spoken quite a lot about almost the first stage of the Catalyst projects, but in terms of sexual harassment and sexual assault. But I just wanted to ask a question around how we're responding to hate crimes on campus, especially in response to the European Commission of Human Rights report that came out 2 weeks ago. And although that report has, I personally believe, rightfully received some criticism for how it's collected its data and what it's saying about universities, I wanted to ask for what proactively could we be doing as a sector to embed some of the responses and some of the recommendations from that report into our teaching, into our student experience, and into our general practice.
Okay. Selma, would you like to take that? And then Martha.
Thank you very much for asking the question. I was waiting for it. There is a lot we can do, but as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, I think our induction program and our curriculum really need to encompass that. There is no other way of doing it. We have to make sure, just like internationalization, employability, if you remember the academics here who worked in the sector for 20 more years, you would know that employability, internationalization were bolt-on modules and courses. We have phased it out, and now it is contextualized in every module, depending on whichever the module is. In the same way, Equality Act, the learning of diversity, the cultural intelligence, needs to be part of every module. Even if you're studying pure maths, find a way. Ask the clever maths professor how to bring equality and diversity into the pure maths by showing scholarship from across the globe, for example. The other thing I would also say, create safe environment to have conversation. It is absolutely essential. There is no other way, apart from experiencing conversational kind of confrontation with your stereotypes. So if you have a stereotype against a particular race, religion, ethnicity, sexuality, give the students and the community the opportunity to confront that stereotype, have a conversation, educate themselves.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything more?
Yeah, so I just mirror those points. I think the reference of having a conversation and facilitating that conversation is really key. So a lot of what we do is going into universities and engaging students in the leadership of this work. So whether that's student leaders that exist already, whether that's in the student union or various academic departments, they're facilitating bystander work. There's also lots of cause, I think, for us to engage survivors in really creative ways. So where they have been involved in an investigative process, their case study can be used for further training. They can pick apart policy. And I think those conversations that we can use to include as many people as possible within what was recommended, I think is really key.
To be slightly controversial, as it were, whilst it needs to be embedded in courses and it needs to be educated, I think that's not sustainable. 18 is way too late. I heard yesterday from visually impaired students across the country that Braille stickers are being pulled and defaced all around the country, and that is an education issue that can't be done at 16, 17, 18, and that whilst we do have a responsibility, institutions do have a responsibility to educate, 18's way too late.
Yeah.
We already have ingrained biases by 10, 11. We need to use the university sector power, the Office for Students, government, to ingrain it in primary and secondary education, because otherwise you're going to be investing year on year on year on education that is fundamentally way too late at 18.
Yeah. Can I just add to that as a plug for the Civic University Commission here, which talked a lot about the wider responsibility to the education ecosystem beyond access. This would be a great piece of work to be doing with local schools and colleges, because you do end up living with the problems later down the line. So how do we get at that level an understanding of this?
But who is going to talk to my school in Bangladesh?
Yes, indeed.
Who is going to talk to the American school? Who is going to talk to the African school?
Yeah.
That is a bigger battle I cannot fight. But what I can do, we can change our curriculum to educate them. 18 is not too late. I was a different person when I was 18 to who I am now. And that's because of British education. So we need to take pride in our university education, take that as a catalyst for change for anybody who seeks education from our sector.
Thank you. Right, well, I think we've covered some incredibly difficult but productive areas for what we were trying to do. So perhaps we could thank the panel for their contribution.